This is kind of a serious video. Actually, it is a serious video. I know that a lot of the times I come on and I make little jokes and I do little things where I make myself laugh, things like that. But this is serious. Today, September 11th, 2010, is the ninth anniversary of the single worst terrorist attack on American soil. That, of course, being September 11th, 2001, where 3,000 individuals, not only Americans, but there were also individuals from other countries, boarded 4 flights. Unfortunately, they never reached their destinations. Um, those planes were hijacked by cowardly terrorists and flown into both the World Trade Center buildings, plus the Pentagon, and one would have crashed into the White House if it hadn't been for the actions of a few brave passengers on board that plane. They caused the plane to go down near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Um, Unfortunately, there were no survivors when it came to the 3,000 people who were killed. Unfortunately, um, I remember that morning. I remember that morning quite vividly. I got up. I guess it was about 10:30 Central Time that morning, and I go out in the living room, and my mother tells me the Twin Towers are gone. I'm like, what Twin Towers? And she said, the World Trade Center. I said, what happened? She said, somebody flew planes into both buildings. And I was just stunned. I couldn't believe it. It was just, it just didn't seem real. It seemed so surreal. It seemed so surreal that we would have these attacks on our own soil. I was flabbergasted. I was gobsmacked. I just couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. And I remember spending the rest of that day watching the television, glued to the television set, except for when I went outside right around sunset and I watched the sunset. And I hadn't watched the sunset in a long time. And I actually watched the sunset. And that day, I mean, the only thing I could think of was my niece, who was at that time 2 years old. I thought, of course, I hoped that nothing would happen to her or her parents. Of course, I don't really think there was much worry about that because, but the thing is, you kind of get that bit of a, I don't want to say paranoid feeling, but you get kind of a feeling of, what if this happens somewhere else? I mean, of course, eventually I learned later that day that not only had the Twin Towers been struck, but also that the Pentagon had been struck and a plane went down near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And the feelings I had that day were just, I was in shock, I was angry, I was upset because I never thought something like this would happen on our own soil. I just it didn't seem real. It was, like I said, it was surreal. It was a surreal moment. And I watched the footage. I remember one time, it may have been that day or maybe the next day, they showed footage of people jumping out of windows of the World Trade Center. They only showed that footage once that I could see, and then they quit showing it. Um, I just I still have nightmares sometimes about that footage, about the people jumping out of windows. Because just imagine, they're facing two choices. They're either facing being burnt up alive, or they're facing just jumping down to the ground. And I guess they decided to jump out of the windows, commit suicide rather than burning up alive. But what a choice that would be! What a decision! What a decision you'd have to make. Should I jump out a window and die immediately, or should I stay in a building with jet fuel all around and burn up? It was just it was. I know that must have been a very difficult decision for those people to make, and I just can't imagine. I can't imagine having to make a decision like that ever. But those people had to make a decision. And 9/11, I will never forget it. I'll never forget what happened on that day. I know there's millions of Americans that'll never forget what happened on that day. And I'm not going to get political about this. I'm not even going to address the idiocy of the conspiracy theories. This is just my personal feelings about that day and what happened. I'm not going to get into the political you know, I'm not going to get into the political stuff. I'm not going to get into the conspiracy theories. I'm just going to tell you, that day will remain forever burned in my memory. And I know it will remain burned in the memory of many other Americans. Not just Americans, but the relatives of those from other countries who were in those planes and in those twin towers and lost their lives. And I still can picture it even to this day. The events that happened. I mean, they're still pretty fresh in my mind. Um, we might have called my niece that night and her family and told them what happened, or at least we knew what happened. She was 2 years old at that time, and she's 11 now. I know she doesn't even know what happened. She doesn't even she wouldn't even remember. But I certainly remember, and I'll never forget it. And in my opinion, never forget. Never forget. That's how I look at it. Never forget. 9/11. I can't believe it's been almost a decade. It'll be a decade next year since that happened. Since 9/11. It'll be 10 years next year. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable it's been that long. But it seems like it happened yesterday. It's still fresh in my memory. Um, and I mean, I welcome all comments below this video. Whether whether even the 9/11 conspiracy people, if you want to make comments, that's fine too. I will not censor your comments, but I'm not going to respond to your comments. I just don't feel it's necessary. But for those of you who do remember what happened that day and want to make comments, I'll leave the comments, open down below. And may we never forget what happened September 11th, 2001.